Okay, we're in the sixth year of Shulchan Aruch, the halachas of Pesach. So we're going to jump over to Siman Kufi, which is halachas of B'dikas Chametz, and then hopefully, depending on timing and whatever, we'll either go back or I don't know if we'll have time to do. Some of them are not necessarily as important, I guess, for us to know. So I mean, they're all important to know, obviously, but as we're going to get to baking matzah, if you're not the one who's actually baking the matzah and you're just buying it, it's less important than the things that you will be doing, because chametz and having a seder and all that. So that's why we'll stick to those for now, and we'll see what happens. So Siman Kufir Aleph, Hilchos B'dikas Chametz Ubitulay. So now we're going to talk about the halachas that have to do with b'dikas chametz, which means searching out the chametz and also being mevatel the chametz, two separate things. Really, according to the Torah, all you need to do is bittul. What does it mean, bittul? That you say this chametz is not mine anymore. That's really all you have to do. You're mevatel it like we do when we say the statement kol chamira v'chamia. You're basically saying that it's not connected to you. It has nothing to do with you. It's not yours. V'zehu. So why do you also have to do what's called b'dikas chametz? Search it out and get rid of it. So there's two reasons why, if you remember from the Gemara when you learned it. Number one is that bittul has to do with your thoughts and your feelings. So that means that you have to have in mind completely that you're actually being mevatel it and that you don't want it, that it's nothing. But sometimes maybe a person will, you might not fully have that thought while you're doing the bittul. For example, a person has some sort of maybe sourdough that they're very attached to. They give it a name. They do all this stuff. So if you're mevatel it, you're not actually being mevatel it. You're thinking to yourself that you really do want it. It's not nothing to you. So that's number one. Number two is also that what happens if on Pesach itself you find something chametz? You're so used to it. Bread is something that you're so used to the whole year that Chachamim were afraid because you're so comfortable around it that you might take a bite of it or do something before you realize that it's Pesach. So therefore, we do two things. Number one, the bittul, which is what you have to do, but also bedika and finding it, basically searching the chametz out and making sure that it's not around in your house. And this way you know that you're safe on both of these points. So now, what's the halachas about this? So balayla shalifnei erev Pesach, the night before erev Pesach, meaning arle yudalet. Beitkin es chametz, you have to search for the chametz. Now, obviously, you're not cleaning your house by b'dikas chametz. B'dikas chametz means to search for the chametz, but that means that you've cleaned it already. So you're not actually going around and cleaning your whole house. Yeah, you're not supposed to. Now, obviously, if you find chametz, you take care of it. That's why you're doing b'dikas chametz. But the house is supposed to be clean before. When you go around, you're certifying, you've checked for the chametz, and you're making sure that there's nothing there. Now, v'chayavin livdik miyad b'tchilas halayla. When does the chiyuv of b'dikas chametz start? It begins at the beginning of night, which is Sesek Echavah. Now, there's a reason why we do it then. Technically, we should do it other times. But number one, because the candle works best at night, so it needs to be at night. And and also everyone is home at night. So during the day, everyone is around, and you won't do it. You're not going to have that opportunity. Everyone is home, and the candle works the best at night, and therefore that's the way we do it. Now, according to the Alter Rebbe, he actually says you have to do it right away. If you delay it, then you are over on the takana of the Chacham. So it's a very strong statement, as we see. It plays itself out in different ways. But the first opportunity you have, meaning as soon as it says Chacham, that's when the takana is. And if you push it off, you are already over. Masha'inkein, let's say Kriya Shema or something like that. The takana is not to say it right away. We might be afraid you might forget or something like that, so we might institute certain things. But there's no takana that it has to be done at the first possible moment. But b'dikas chametz there is, and that's why it has a special thing. Now, by the way, if you come to a hotel, for example, after the Zman of B'dikas Chametz, let's say, and you're going to be there for Yom Tif, then you have to do B'dikas Chametz also right away. And you're not supposed to do whatever we're going to mention that you're not allowed to do before, like eating or drinking or learning or that type of stuff. When you get to a hotel, it will be the same thing. You shouldn't do any of those things until you check for the Chametz as well. So the halacha continues and says, you're not allowed to eat and you're not allowed to do any malacha or lilmud, even to learn Torah, adds the Alter Rebbe. And also other things that you're not supposed to do before, let's say, davening mincha, if it's within the zman. For example, to sit down to a din Torah, like we mentioned, or to get a haircut, or to do things like that. These are things you're not allowed to start before, if it's too close to the zman of mincha. You're also not supposed to start them from the time of bdikas chametz, and even chatzi shah koydem alayla. And then he adds, and then the Kitzur says even a half hour before. So in other words, it's not only from the zman of tzeis, but from a half hour before, you already have to stop doing these things because we're afraid that you might end up extending your time too much, and therefore you might forget. And as according to Alter Rebbe, like we mentioned, even a delay of a short time, you already were over on the takana. Now, if you tell a friend who's not learning that you want them to remind you when the zman comes, then you could start a half hour before, and you can have someone remind you when the zman is that you should stop. Now, this only works for learning or for other mitzvahs. For the other things that are the shos, according to Alter Rebbe, it looks like we cannot do this same heter of having someone remind you, because, as we said before, really the mitzvah is to do it right away. So if you're doing another mitzvah, then you can get away with it. But when it comes to the mitzvahs, to other things, I'm sorry, then really you shouldn't do that. One second. Now, first of all, okay, so now what about Benegia to, let's say, davening Ma'ariv? So the Rebbe writes in Ayom Yom that we daven Ma'ariv first. In the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, it doesn't say that. It says that you should do the Bdikas Chametz first. But the Alter Rebbe says, but the Rebbe writes in Ayom Yom you should daven first. And someone asked the Rebbe, why does he say differently? So Kitzur, in short, we know when it came to the Alter Rebbe, for example, himself, when he checked chametz, it says he did it for the whole night. Yeah, he came to Mezrich, and I think it was the first year. It took him a whole night. He had one room, probably smaller than this room, and I don't even know if there was a kitchen there. I don't know the details of what it was. It took him a whole night. Now, kavana, to have the kavana, saniza, and all the kabbalistic things, maybe, but the actual bedika shouldn't have taken that long. It's one room. How long does it take you to check a room? And how much chametz did they already have? It's not like today where you have every prepackaged thing is all this preserved and everything. Then it was things went bad. You had bread. What else was chametz? Maybe a couple other things here, there, your pots, your pans. So Bepashtos, the Rebbe says that because the meaning of Chassidim always was that they would do the bdikas chametz for a long time, very carefully. So therefore, you should really daven Ma'ariv first, because that's one of the reasons why. Because you might end up missing the time of Ma'ariv. Okay, it also depends. For example, if you have a minyan and there's a minyan that's going to daven, then for sure you should daven first, even according to Shulchan Aruch. So Kitzur, it ends up being that we usually daven Ma'ariv first, and then you go on to, especially if you usually don't daven Ma'ariv with a minyan. So then it really depends on if you'll forget, if you won't forget. So then maybe you should daven first. But if you're usually daven at home anyways, then it's okay before you go to sleep. So it's fine. You could daven later also. So it depends. But in Inyan, the Rebbe writes in Inyan that we should daven Ma'ariv first. Now, even though he says over here, by the way, that there is a mitzvah to, let me just see if. Even though he does say that the time of Dikas Chametz is really the night before Pesach, technically, let's say you're going to start cooking in your kitchen a week before, yeah, or 2 weeks before, whatever, not you, the people who cook. So really, you have to do Dikas Chametz in that room before. That means if today I decide I want to start cooking for Pesach, I'm turning over my kitchen, yeah? So turning over is a standard lashon used in from houses all over the world. Turning over means that you're making a Pesach thing, right? So if someone says, did you turn over yet? Did you turn over your house? It means for Pesach, yeah? So you're doing this 2 weeks before, a week and a half before. You have to do B'dikas Chametz before. How could you cook in a room that wasn't checked for Chametz? Now, you don't make a bracha. The only time you make a bracha is the night before. Or if it's on, whatever, or later. But if you're doing it before, you don't make a bracha, but you have to check. Your kitchen, you have to walk around with a candle the night after you kasher it or whatever, and you do B'dikas Chametz. And then you say, this is it, and now I know, you don't have to put out 10 pieces, machlekes if you have to, but if you're going to do it later with 10 pieces, you don't have to put out 10 pieces, at least in this situation. You guys will talk about later, Bachman and Yeshiva. But for a regular person, you don't have to put out 10 pieces if you're in your kitchen. You have a whole house to do, you're going to do another B'dikas Chametz the night of, but the room that you're going to be, that's Kilu Pesach, that you have to walk around with a candle, and you look around, and then you certify it that it's kosher Pesach. So that's something to remember also. Okay. Sit base. Now, ein boitkin ela bener shel shaiva yechidi. It says in the Gemara, yeah.
Just one thing before, since marriage is just, there's just that, like, all you need to compel themselves to do, and so it's really just like barely under one, how could that overcome, like, when you look at this with your eyes?
So b'dikas chametz is not midiraisa. We said it's only midirabanan. Midiraisa, you're just not. What's like midiraisa? You're just not allowed to have chametz. And there's a mitzvah of beer, a mitzvah that if you have chametz, you have to destroy it. It's a if you have, meaning if you don't have, then you don't do it. Now you want to be makui in the mitzvah, which is why we put out 10 pieces to burn, whatever. But in Indian, if you don't have, then you got rid of the chametz. I mean, what you know. So the b'dikas chametz is anyways only midrabanan, and also you're not losing anything. The question is how you balancing which one should go first over preference of the other. But you're not losing either mitzvah here. In fact, that's part of the explanation that I said is that according to the way the Rebbe explains it, at least according to one reason, is that if the Chassidim would check the whole night and then they might lose the mitzvah of Ma'ariv, that's why they should do Ma'ariv first. In other words, that's the issue if you mamish lose it. But if you don't lose it, if let's say I daven at home, I don't have a minyan in downtown. 1 second. So if I daven at home because there's no minyan and I'm used to it, so then no problem. I can check first and then do it after. As long as, but if I know that my checking will take a whole night, then you should daven Ma'ariv first. But we don't do that anymore. Nowadays we do all the b'dikas, we do all the cleaning before. So b'dikas chametz shouldn't. I mean, it could take you if you wanted to, but in theory you spent weeks cleaning, so you don't also now have to spend the whole night doing b'dikas chametz. Okay, but let's talk about. We'll come to the 10 pieces. We're not up to there yet. We'll get there. We'll get there. Yeah.
We didn't write the Hayom the reason because it took still a little bit. Everyone just wrote Hayom. So like.
So is this an attempt at a correction? Is that what I'm hearing? So in the Hayom Yom, this is what I said. You weren't listening to me. I said in Hayom Yom, the Rebbe says, and somebody asked the Rebbe, the Rebbe wrote a letter responding that it's actually an interesting letter because you see it a few times where people ask the Rebbe about different minhagim in Hayom Yom. And the Rebbe says a few things. Number one, he says usually that I ran it by the Frierdiker Rebbe, and this is do it. Yeah, but over here, but to get to this, he actually answered and he said that first of all, he says what I write in Hayom Yom is not the Shulchan Aruch. It's not halacha necessarily. It's the minig, right? He says that's the minig of Chassidim. Now, why was that the minig of Chassidim? So he explains one reason in the letter. The Rebbe writes is bepashtus because they would search for a long time. Oh, I don't have a question. No, for sure. That's the way we do it. This person who wrote was, had a question. I wouldn't have a question. Rebbe writes in Hayom Yom. That's what we do for sure.
So somebody asks you about what to do first. They daven Ma'ariv at home by themselves. What we taught.
Should daven Ma'ariv first. Yeah. I'm just saying, but here the Rebbe writes these options. It says like if a person, whatever, you do have those options. But yeah, mitzvah us, you daven Ma'ariv first. Daven Ma'ariv first. Says it in okay. Again, the Rebbe there says he wasn't necessarily saying the halacha. He was just saying the minig of what's done. Okay, let's go further. So, when you do check, you should be using a candle, a single candle, ideally made from beeswax if you could. And by the way, this would be even by day. Okay, even by day you would do this. Now, the exception would be if you're going into your car, and you're checking your car by day, and so you open up all the doors. If you're doing it by day and it has a lot of windows, so you could open the doors and you could use the sun. You should use for under the seats. You should use a flashlight. Do not use a candle. And the same thing when you go under your bed, don't use a candle. I actually know when I was a kid, an unfortunate story of a family that they because of b'dikas chametz, they had a fire, and it was not a very good outcome. So when it comes to places like that, you should be using a flashlight. Or on your phone nowadays, everyone has a flashlight, so it's very easy. But even without that, people used to use small little flashlights. And there, you go under the bed, you check all these places. You're not going to take a candle and really go to the places you need when it's in a tight spot. So the whole mile of a candle is it does it better at checking. But if you're afraid to use it in areas where there's flammable things, obviously you should use. In that case, you should not use that. Now, the common question is. Let's finish this first. Now, it should also be voloi kalua. It shouldn't be like what you use for Havdalah, right? Like more than one wick that's woven, which is because then mishum devi kavuka, then it becomes a torch. And when it becomes a torch, now you're even more afraid to walk around with a torch. So then you're not going to check anything well. So for sure, it should be a very simple one. The b'shas atchak, what happens? One second. The b'shas atchak, what happens if it's a situation that's not a normal situation? For example, she'in le'ner shel shayva, you don't have this candle. You went to a hotel somewhere and you forgot to bring. So then, in those days, yibdik b'ner shel chelik. There's a few options. You could use a candle instead of made of shayva, of beeswax. You could use one made of chela, fats of the animal. But he brings from the Alter Rebbe where it says va'adif bener shel shuman. It's actually better to use one of shuman, which is also fats of the animal. The difference between chelev and shuman is that chelev is non-kosher fats and shuman is kosher fats. So if you're using non-kosher fats, then wherever you go, you're afraid it's going to drip. Yeah, boiling hot non-kosher fat drips on your kalim, makes it taste. If it's kosher one, so then okay, you're worried about maybe your milchika dishes, but you're not worried about your flishka stuff. So if you don't have beeswax, so nowadays we don't have candles made of fats anyway. So nowadays, 1 second. So nowadays it's not so relevant. But in those days where those are your options, that was the hierarchy. For us, obviously, we would use a flashlight. That's the Kitzur, that's for sure. Especially in cases where you need to use the flashlight, it's totally kosher and okay to do that. Now, the common question that usually comes up is, should you shut the lights? You're telling me that with a candle is better, so maybe you should shut the lights in the room and use a candle, right? And people do this sometimes. They run to shut the lights by different mitzvahs of candle. Yeah, by Havdalah. Havdalah people run to shut the lights, or you don't have to. First of all, they never shut it in 770, but also on Yom Tif, when you do Havdalah, yeah, you don't shut the lights. So you don't shut the lights. But either way, Kitzur, no, I'm talking about by Havdalah, but who does, we'll get there, but the Kabbaim do. But either way, so over here, you don't have to shut the lights, and the Rebbe used to leave the lights on when he did the chametz, and that's what we do. Yes, you had a question.
Okay, I think you kind of said it.
Beautiful.
Why don't we just use flashlights the entire time?
So again, there's the minig. We don't change from the minig the way it was. So that's it. That's the minig. Once it's established, that's the way we keep it. And it does say in Gemara, I think, and in other places that b'dikas yafe b'araner, something like that. That checking is better when you use a candle. So that's it. We use a candle. We also use a feather and the wooden stick. We'll talk about soon. There's a reason why we do it. But we also use a feather. Why don't you use a broom? Okay, so there's it says why we use the feather, but we could maybe nowadays there's better options. Yeah. Maybe use a vacuum and then clean the vacuum out. You could suck it all up, but we don't do that. Yeah. We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. We're not done. Paper, but we're gonna get there. Well, we'll get there. We'll get there. I promise you, by the time we're done, you'll know exactly how it should be done. I hope. Okay. Next, Gimel. Which rooms do you need to check? And this really also means which rooms do you have to clean. Now, if you're cleaning before, so in other words, halacha doesn't talk about cleaning. Halacha talks about checking, because cleaning is really your responsibility. You do that before checking. Yeah, checking is to make sure there's nothing there. Cleaning is something else. So where do you have to check? You need to check any room that there's a chshash, that your chayshish maybe chametz was brought in there. So in other words, the real chiyuv, I guess you could say, of doing of making sure there's no chametz, at least min haTorah, would be in places that you know for sure there's chametz there. Your kitchen, there's a chiyuv min haTorah to make sure that there's no chametz there. Then there's any places that you have a chshash, maybe chametz is brought there, so that's already only midrabanan. But even there, now for us it doesn't really matter. Midrabanan, midrash doesn't make a difference. You have to treat it the same way. You check it both the same. But in other words, what I'm saying, I don't know. We'll come to this really. There's a difference between your kitchen and your bedroom. So a lot of times people they decide that Pesach is a time for spring cleaning, which is fine. It could be a time for spring cleaning as long as you have enough manpower and enough emotional space and enough everything, yeah? But if a person spends a week on the upstairs in the guest bedroom, vacuuming the curtains on the window, and then they forget about the kitchen, and then 2 days before they're rushing to the kitchen, that's called misplaced, what do you call it? Misplaced time, misplaced resources. The kitchen, or priorities, the kitchen is where obviously there's going to be more comments. The guest room curtain, you can check, you should, but don't spend that much time on it. The ceiling, you have to go and so you have to know what's sort of more important than what's left. A place where there's for sure chametz, that obviously you need to check. A place that you have a chshash, maybe chametz was brought there, so then also midrabanan, you have to check those as well. Now, afilu hamartifim, even the cellars, waliyos and the roofs or the second floor, the attics, the chanuyos and stores, or beis eitzim, or places where you store. Let's say in those cases, wood was basically the fuel. So you'd have to go in there and get wood all the time to keep your house warm and your oven cooking. So these are places that if you can realistically have a chash that chametz was probably brought there, you have to check those. So if you have a chash in these places, you need to check them. Now, nowadays, if you have kids, I'm not sure nowadays, even in those days, but if you have kids, then all of a sudden those rooms get a lot bigger, yeah? But if an older couple lives by themselves, the kitchen, the dining room, the living room are the places they have to check. And if someone sneaks food in their bedroom, maybe there as well. But once you have kids around, so now everything needs to be checked. All the rooms need to be checked, basically. Anywhere where they're going to go and sit there munching food, especially right after Purim, and you have all of these, you have all these hamantashen. So obviously you have to check even the bathroom. Who brings food in the bathroom? Yeah, but if you have kids, for all you know, they walked in with something, wonderful. It's a mitzvah. It's a bracha and a mitzvah. So you get extra mitzvahs. Instead of just checking your kitchen, you can now check your whole house. Beautiful. Okay, what's it?
Now the kids are the ones cleaning up in the house.
Well, I don't know about that. Right. Kids think they clean, but yeah.
Not in the home.
Okay.
No.
No, so they do help, and they should. It's true, and there are a lot of rooms that you could give them. Now, the truth is, can you rely on them to do the checking? That's the real question.
Yes.
So to clean, yes, but for b'dikas chametz, no, and that will come to later. Now, what about now? So let's say a shul, you have to check a shul, especially now. There used to be a gather of a Beis HaKnesses, right? There's a Beis HaKnesses, and then there was what we have. What we have is a shul, a shtibel, a Beis Medrash, or a Chabad house, whatever you want to call it. It's a whole other category. A Beis HaKnesses used to be literally a shul that you just daven in, and they lock the doors, and nothing happens there. No kiddushim, nothing. These were when the Gemara discusses that the Beis HaKnesses was doing with the Beis HaMikdash. This is what it's referring to. It's a very strict decorum in those types of places. So, but in a place where there's food that's brought in, obviously it has to be checked, and you have to make sure there's nothing there. A boiler room is unlikely that you have to check it. You never go in there with food. So if it's in your house, if it's accessible, you open it up, you look. A lot of people have their boilers in their garage where they do have food coming in and out. So that's a different story. So you have to know. Your garage, you have to check. Your car, you have to check. Some people, they never bring, it's the father's car, and he never brings any food in the car. Right? So if that's the case, then he doesn't have to check. But if he has kids and they come in once in a while, then you probably do have to check. So you have to know what you're dealing with. But any room where there's a likelihood that chametz was brought in needs to be checked. So too, if you have anything that stores chametz, any kalim or things like that, so obviously you have to check those as well. I think the Rebbe Rashab used to say that in his days, the family knew to check even behind the oven. So you have different levels of chumrah, I guess you could say. And in those days, the ovens were big; they weren't like ours, the portable ovens; they were like built in. So I guess it depends. But any place that you could realistically think there was chametz needs to be checked. Before you check. You should first sweep the whole place. And clean it. In other words, the bdika is not the cleaning. The bdika's chametz is to check. You clean it first. And this way it's going to be easier to do the checking. Now, that's one reason. One reason why you have to clean it is because it shouldn't take you too long later. But also, Rabbeinu Kasad Alter Rebbe writes another reason, that you have to sweep it. And he's koydem abdika. And he gives a different reason. The fish koydem akibud yesh afruris harbe ve'inu yachol livdek yafe. That we don't have this in our days, but it used to be that if it was really dirty, well, I guess we do have it in some ways. But he says that before you sweep it, there was like it was very dusty. Their homes were very dusty. Their floors were they didn't have they had earth as the floor. So if you don't sweep it, then there's particles. It's very hard to see. So I think you could apply the same thing. A lot of times, you go behind certain things. If it wasn't clean before, there's pieces, if it's in your kitchen especially, there's pieces, there's stain, there's things like that. So it's hard to know what's chametz, what's not. So it should be clean before. Now, what was those again? So, but the point over here, what comes out as an interesting point, is that when you search for the b'dikas chametz, the point is not to find the chametz necessarily. Right? The point is just to be sure, to give a stamp of approval that there's no chametz. The checking, the cleaning, the getting rid of it, all that was done before. When you come and you do the b'dikas chametz, you're just making sure and giving a stamp like a hachshir. You're just making sure that there's nothing there. And you just want to make sure that it was done properly. So you're looking at a few things. You're looking at maybe some ingredients of something someone left out or something like that, and things like that. We didn't talk about the place that you're going to sell. We'll get there soon. But for now, we're talking about the parts that you're going to be using. So that's the seder of how it is. Yeah, you had a question? You had a question? I thought you had your hand raised before.
Yeah, we have a big photo for the jar today, right?
You have what?
Big photo for the jar today. It's true.
Okay. I'll give it another few minutes. This is important stuff. You have to know these halachas. Okay, let's do one more. Let's do one more sip if we could. Okay. Rafes Shel Bakar, when it comes to the places where the animals are, the stables, you give the animals wheat to eat. Now, this wheat is not chametz. You're just giving them wheat. right? And you give it lebehemis lechel. V'chein lul shel tarnegeilim, or also if you have a chicken coop. Also, sheneis lehem sham tvor, you're giving them wheat to eat, but they're not chametz. So technically, ain't tzrichim b'dika. You don't have to check those areas for chametz. Because what's the chash? The chash is not that someone ate a cookie in there. The chash is about this particular, about the wheat. So therefore, kishama linischam to klal, maybe the wheat never became chametz. And even if it did become chametz, maybe the animals ate it all. So you have what's called a svek sveka. And if you have a svek sveka, you don't have to check it. But let's say you took wheat that for sure was chametz. For example, you soak a whole batch in water for some reason, and then you give it to them. So now you're only left with one suffix, one dat. Maybe the animals ate it, but maybe they didn't. You only have one suffix. Then you can't rely on that. It's bedika, and you have to check. Now that's why, by the way, when people discuss throwing chametz into your courtyard, yeah. So it says that if you throw your chametz into the courtyard, you don't have to check after it. So that's really in like Rosh Hashanah areas. If it's in your backyard and you have chametz that you know for sure you threw there, you do have to check to make sure that it's not there. Just like in a lul shetar negelim, where even though they're eating everything, but if you know for sure chametz was there, so then you have to check. So here also, you have to make sure that if it's in your own backyard, so if you're doing it enough in advance, then fine. But if it's not enough in advance, then you have to look around to make sure that there's nothing there. If it's tiny little pieces that you crush up and you put in the garden, and the animals are coming to eat in the ants, so then it's you made it hefker anyways, kafra dara, and it's broken up into tiny pieces. It's okay. But if you threw away it 2 days before, you had extra pizza and you decided you want to do throw it away that way, and it's in your own rishus, then that's going to be a problem. You have to look for it. Now, then he says, even if you gave them, let's say, real chametz, but for 30 days before you stopped, then in tzarich bedika, then you don't have to, because now you have another suffix, even though it was for sure chametz. So you only have one suffix. Maybe they ate it, but you have another suffix. The other suffix is that within 30 days, this food could have become iniro lachilas kelev. It could have already rotted and became bad in 30 days. And therefore, you have a double suffix again, that even if there was chametz, maybe the animals ate it. And if they didn't eat it, maybe it became iniro lachilas kelev, and therefore there's no reason, so there's no gzeira of the chacham. So that's what comes out so far from this. Okay, any questions on that? Yeah. Your question?
What if you have animals and they get to the back door?
And what?
And
That's not a problem. That's not a problem. That's not chametz. First, it's iniro lachilas kalev, and once it's digested, it's not a problem. You do have a problem with pet food and stuff like that, but we'll save that for another time, maybe. Okay. What?